30 years ago, they were doing using swing benches, they were doing rubber bands, but heavy lifting, didn't really come into world of swimming, I think, until maybe seriously beginning of the 2000s. If you work against a heavy resistance, you're more or less forced into producing more horizontal force, which is needed in acceleration. Some type of plyometrics, some kind of jumping are extremely stressful. So injuries are bound to happen if you're not careful, especially with the ones that are not experienced, maybe on the heavier side. Every sprinter in an Olympic final are strong, but not necessarily in the gym. But it can express a lot of force. But if you take them into a gym situation, maybe they are very uncomfortable with the bar. But if you put them down like in a leg press or something where there's no technical component, most of them are really, really strong. People tell me, what kind of food supplement should I take? And I said, how much do you sleep? And I say 6 hours, but I forget about the food supplement. Start sleeping, That's the most potent way of improving performance there is. If you need to go to a training camp to train properly, you need to go to a training camp to eat and sleep properly, then there's something wrong at home.
Welcome to this new episode. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor for the podcast, Moxy Monitor. If you've been following my work, you know that the Moxy is a tool that I use a lot for testing, but also for everyday training and coaching. For those who don't know about the Moxy Monitor yet, it's a NIRS device that measures muscle oxygen saturation and blood volume in real time. It's a non-invasive sensor that is placed on the skin and can be worn during any training or sporting activity. Motocross riders and climbers wear it on their forearms, hockey players on the ice, swimmers can wear it in water. I've used it to test rugby players, CrossFit athletes, endurance athletes, and more. The Moxy allows you to individualize work and rest periods, optimize load, reps and sets, identify training thresholds in real time, and even correct movement based on what the data shows you. You can also use the Moxy Monitor to determine an athlete's energetic limiting factor and their individual training zones. Using this process, I can now target the athlete's limiter with precision in order to improve their performance without adding unnecessary volume to their program. You can view and collect the data on your Garmin watch and can also pair the Moxy with other physiological testing products such as the VO2 Master, Pnoe, and Cosmed VO2 systems. The Moxy is a product I've been using for many months with great success, and I highly recommend it to any coach who's interested in digging a little bit deeper on the physiological side of health, fitness, or performance. You can use the coupon UPSIDE at checkout for a 5% discount on moxymonitor.com/shop. That's UPSIDE, UPSIDE, for a 5% discount. With that said, let's get into the show. Okay, Håkan, we're on the podcast. How are you doing today?
Fine, and you? Thanks for the invitation, Sean.
No, it's a pleasure to have you on. I can see behind you that the weather's looking okay in Sweden right now.
We had an amazing summer so far, so can't complain.
Okay, well, we're very jealous down here in Switzerland because we've had a summer for the last 5 days and the rest of it has been absolutely terrible. So,
oh wow. Okay.
That gets me into the first topic I wanted to talk about. From your standpoint, and given where you live and where you've coached sprinters for decades now, what has been the influence of weather and temperature on how you organize your training year?
Well, again, I'm a true dinosaur when it comes to this sport. I was a sprinter myself in the 70s, the beginning of the 80s, and we didn't really have any indoor facilities. We were running outdoors most of the time. And at the time, I think we were pretty influenced about maybe the old US kind of long to short kind of training. So we did lots of winter rolls, we did lifted weights, and we never really got into shape until the season was over. but at the moment we're pretty blessed at the moment. I think we have almost 30 decent indoor facilities in a country of 10 million people. That's pretty good. And we started to get holes in the beginning of the 90s, and I think that really made a huge difference. You could run with a lot higher intensity in a major part of the year. So I think training facilities made a huge difference. I don't think the only downside with that is that we train indoor mainly on hard surfaces. We don't have access to grass for 7-8 months of the year. So So that the only thing that is a bit challenging, is the surface we train on.
If you did have access to more grass, even maybe indoors, how much away from competition, how much time would your sprinters spend on the grass versus on the track?
I think we still would do the majority on the synthetic surface, but to do tempo runs and that kind of type of training on more compliant surfaces would be fantastic.
When you talk about tempo runs, what distance sprinters do you coach currently?
Well, it's 100, 200, some hurdlers, some long jumpers, and only one guy that runs the quarter mile, 400 meters.
Okay, so if we're talking about sprinters, let's say 100, 200 meter in competition, if we talk about tempo runs, how much of that would they do away from competition and over what kind of distances? Just to get an idea of, and if I don't know if that's even the right word to use, but that would be kind of the endurance or the aerobic component of a sprinter's work. So how much volume does a sprinter actually get in those lower, quote unquote, lower speeds and longer distances?
Well, I found, in the 90s when we tried to introduce more high intensity running, we did big volumes, high intensity, but it came to a stage where people almost got stale, It was so. Then we started doing more tempo runs, and at one stage, I think we were doing a bit too much of that as well, especially with a really sprint type of runners that can't tolerate high volume. So, we do tempo runs, and we usually run, hundreds, 200, something 300s, and if you go to training camps, with warm weather training camps in the winter, we try to do it on grass. But I think you need both, because if you train on hard surfaces all the time, you're doing lots of plyometrics, you develop a certain stiffness, and tendons get really stiff, and but I think you need the other type of work too, for rhythm and for to stay injury free.
Yeah, so you would say that almost lower intensity component does have a carryover to sprinting, in the sense that it gives you maybe some work capacity, opportunities to work on some details that maybe when you're close to top speed you don't get to focus on as much.
Yeah, I would say so. We don't do much during competitive season, maybe now and then, but not really big volumes. So it's more we do more of that kind of stuff when we have our big volumes of high intensity. I like to deload with a bit lower intensity on soft surface if possible.
And I know you've also, do you still work with other sports besides sprinting, or you just
yeah, for sure. I work at the high performance center in Växjö, Sweden, and kind of what kind of a role can I describe as? I'm more like an advisor, consultant, to professional team sports when it comes to ice hockey, football, handball, you name it. And I'm, advice in terms of speed and strength related matters and testing.
In that context, and talking specifically about tempo runs, is that something that you might use outside of sprinting specifically? Do you think that's something that maybe some team sports can benefit from, in terms of a method of working on, like you said, some rhythm, working on some details without necessarily going full speed?
Well, especially some of the football teams, that we work with, and they try to emphasize, low intensity training as well, because when they are during the season, the games, they're very intense. Training tends to be intense all the time, so they try to fit in, low intensity training during the season as well, for deloading and hopefully benefit, recovery and so on.
And if you talk about other sports, I know you've worked with swimming before. Is that still a sport that you work with?
Yeah. I was involved with. Her name was Anna-Karin Kammerling. She was. I think she has about 60 international medals especially in the 50-meter butterfly. And I did, helped her with her land training, and that's a special sport. Her competitive distance, distance 50 meters, time 25 seconds. They still swim, 6 to 8 kilometers a day. It's very, very hard for a track and field coach to comprehend sometimes, why they do that. But that's how it is, they swim a lot, and they say they have to spend a lot of time in the water and so on. And they can actually, they tolerate a lot of high intensity swimming as well. Maybe it has to do with the low intensity work they do. I don't know. It's that's how they do it, at least.
Okay, and from a speed development standpoint, how does the land training, how does that fit into a swimmer's program, and what transfer do you see from land training to such short disciplines in the water like the 50 meter?
Well, I think it's been a big change actually in swimming. 30 years ago they were doing using swim benches, they were doing rubber bands, but heavy lifting, didn't really come into the world of swimming, I think, until maybe seriously beginning of the 2000s. And I think it has a big role, definitely, especially in the sprint events.
So just being strong and having the structure to be able to generate the power from and be able to, like you said, it's still a pretty short event, but they do spend a lot of time doing the low intensity work. Have you seen any? Has there been any experiments in swimming where they maybe sprinters tried to take more of a land sprinting approach, swim sprinters? I mean, in the sense that they drastically reduce the low intensity work and emphasize the high intensity more.
Well, it's quite interesting because if you suggest that, ask them, if anyone really tried that kind of method. They say some tried, but it didn't really work out. They say, but they can't really pinpoint who. So I don't know. I think they're still pretty hung up about volume.
And do you think there's maybe a physiological basis for doing so much low intensity work, even though the events are so short? Is there a rationale that somewhere maybe makes sense to do so much low intensity work despite the intensity of the event?
Well, I don't really have a straight answer to that, but I think you have to accept the fact that that's how they do it. And I mean, of course, you can have opinions about it, but I'm a track coach, so who am I to say?
Yeah, exactly. So let's go back to sprinting from your experience, and maybe let's talk about Sweden, since this is the locale where you evolve right now. Out of all the sports that you see, which ones could benefit the most from sprint work, but they don't do it because maybe it's not in the culture, or maybe it's not what the coaches want, etc.?
I think really the sport of football, soccer, could benefit from more speed training. And also the technical aspect. I say sometimes, if I go to a soccer field and watch 12-year-old football players run, and I come back 10 years later, they usually run with worse mechanics 10 years later. So they're very occupied about small-sided games, quick feet, and I think they could really benefit from a bit more mechanical work, when it comes to sprinting.
What, in your mind, what are the type of exercises, the type of work that you would get soccer players to do that will help them with their sprinting, but maybe that are not exercises that are as demanding as the ones you would use for pure sprinters?
No, but I think you have to start with teaching, people, linear sprinting. I think you have to start in that end. You have to start with, teach the players, proper mechanics and upright proper mechanics, and eventually go into acceleration. They change the direction they get all the time when they play. So I don't think that is something you should break out of the training. But definitely more linear sprinting and up to a higher velocity. I mean, hamstring injuries is a huge problem in modern football. I think it has surpassed ACL injuries even in the Premier League, and I think this because they're hesitating, or they're a bit scared, or running slightly longer, higher intensity sprints.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where usually the hamstring injuries occurs. It's end of the halves. You're forced into taking a longer sprints, and then you pop your hamstring.
Yeah, so it's kind of a catch-22 because you need to do it if you want to be ready for it, but then that's also where maybe coaches see it happen the most, and so they're less inclined to want to do it.
Well, you shouldn't be exposed to it for the first time in a game situation. You say so. It's room for improvement there, I think.
There's definitely room for improvement. If we talk about still in the context, let's say in the context of soccer, do you think resistance sprinting has a place for beginner athletes if we want to emphasize the acceleration portion of the sprint, or would you probably keep that for more advanced runners?
Well, I mean, you can use resisted sprinting to increase speed and strength, but you could also use it to improve mechanics. I mean, if you work against a heavy resistance, you're more or less forced into producing more horizontal force, which is needed in acceleration. Mm-hmm. So I think you can use it in almost every age. I mean, you don't have to use just resisted sprint. You can do hill runs and stuff like that too. And I think it's a great technical tool as well.
Yeah, definitely. I've working with a local rugby team. We always try to. We're lucky to have a nice sports complex, and we always try to use the nice upslope in our first training sessions to get that the hill, and it also correct me if I'm wrong, but reduces the speed that you can achieve as well a little bit, which is maybe a little quote unquote safer at the start than throwing someone on a flat and telling them to run 50.
Yeah, I agree 100%, especially at the beginning of the preparation period when you start to run the high intensity. Mm-hmm. Resist them a bit, and if you're scared of hamstring injuries, it's a good way to reduce that risk, I think, mm-hmm. especially at the beginning.
Now, if we talk about exercises that you see people perform in order to maybe get stronger for sprinting in team sports, I'm thinking Nordic curls, for example. What is your view of such exercises for sprinting specifically in people that are not pure sprinters?
Well, Nordic hamstring is probably the only exercise with some scientific evidence that it prevents injury. Mm-hmm. I think maybe the Copenhagen abductor race as well, but there's many ways of training hamstrings. So if you did other ways of training hamstrings with some eccentric stress load, maybe you would benefit just as much. It hasn't been studied. Mm-hmm. But you mustn't forget, that hamstring is definitely a prime mover in sprinting. Is really, really important. Doing heaps of eccentric work, working the hamstring as a knee flexor might prevent injuries. But if you want to be able to produce more force, you got to treat it more, I think, like a hip extensor. Mm-hmm. Because it's a funny muscle like that, because it works over two joints. So it flexes the knee, but also extends the hip. So mm-hmm. Mustn't forget that. To train it in a more complex way, I would assume. And I mean, there are studies too that shows that the hamstring is really, really involved also, even in the initial acceleration. So definitely not a coincidence that everyone runs fast as a rather big bum and well-developed hamstrings. That's how it is.
Like you said, it is how it is. Now, if we talk about exercises that you would use with your sprinters, but that you see some maybe team sport athletes use and that you think are maybe a little bit too advanced for people that are maybe not specifically sprinters, what comes to mind there?
Well, I think a lot of athletes, when it comes to strength development, can benefit from plyometrics, different kind of plyometrics. But we mustn't forget that some type of plyometrics, some kind of jumping, are extremely stressful. So injuries are bound to happen if you're not careful, especially with the ones that are not experienced, maybe on the heavier side. So if you start doing excessive bounding and hurdle jumps with a guy that is 28 and never jumped before, he's going to run into problems for sure. But if you start, developing jumping technique with the young players when they're 12, 13, 14, just as you do with other techniques, they're fine. And it can be in a fantastic way of develop strength that's pretty specific to a lot of sports.
And so if you're not lucky to have those kids that young, or maybe you just get the athletes when they're a little bit older, and like you said, on the heavier side, personally working with rugby players, you get the whole pack, the whole forwards. They're not on the lighter side. They're definitely not in the weight range that you might see your sprinters, where you can, like you say, just hop, skip, bound them all day and they're fine. What type of exercise would you use in that context to still try and build some resiliency, build that lower leg, build some elasticity, but without putting too much strain on the system?
Well, it's not the jumping itself, it's the landing this problem. so I mean, as long as you jump up, you're fine. You can jump upstairs all day and they'd be fine, even those really, really heavy guys, and it's very, very explosive. And so that's one way of going it. And if you decide, and this guy really need to develop his stiffness, he really need to develop his elasticity or whatever. I mean, start easy and see it as a project over time. Just start skipping rope, simple exercises and see how it goes. So don't start with depth jumps from 2 meters, the first week, or other, stupid method. You have to be careful. You have to have good communication. You have to have good eyes and see how they respond. But I think there are other ways of developing. I mean, you can flywheel training is another way, a great way of developing extended strength that they can benefit from. So there are other ways of doing it as well.
Yeah. What kind of space does the flywheel take in your mind when it comes to the possibilities that it gives you for your sprinters, for example? Is that a tool that you're incorporating more and more, or is it something you've already been using for many years now?
We've been using the flywheel since 1993, I think. We got the first hamstring yo-yo from Per Tesch. He was working with NASA, and they developed the system. And he asked me if I was interested in eccentric strength training, and I said, we do that all the time. We are jumping all the time. We can put, you can get assistance in the concentric phase and so on. We can do it, But if you can develop something for the hamstring, I would be really interested. So they developed a hamstring yo-yo machine in 1993 for us, and it's still spinning in the gym. We use it every fall, and I think it has prevented quite a few hamstring injuries actually. But if you talk about the standing, the squat, the squatting, I think it has a very good place too. Maybe especially for people with a little bit slightly back injuries and stuff. They with bulging discs and so on that are not comfortable lifting very, very heavy on the shoulders. Then the harness you use when it's spreading the load on bigger areas. So I have a couple of guys that has been using it. It's regular for the last couple of years, and I frankly I don't see they have lost anything when it comes to strength. So very interesting concept. I think it's more room for research when it comes to eccentric overload still. Not much has been done on the elite population, I think. So
yeah, that's always the hard part, is trying to get elite athletes to go into a study design that might not actually help their performance in some way or another. That's always a hard point.
You'd rather be the control group that do it.
Yeah, I'll come in as long as I get into the control group. Staying on the flywheel, would you even go as far as saying that maybe it might be a better way to maintain or even develop strength while offloading the system a little bit more, less load, less actual loading on the skeleton, on the spine? Would you go as far as saying that, or do you still think that as if you can carry a bar on your back, if you're comfortable with that and you can do it efficiently, properly, that's still the better way to go?
I'm not ready to say yes or no. I think both methods has a place. What is interesting too about the flywheel training is that you seem to need very few repetitions to get strong. You don't need a lot of volume. So it's it's high intensity, and that's something you have to realize too when you're planning the training. That you can't, if you're doing a flywheel squats one day, you can't really go out and run maximum sprinting the day after. It takes a toll. But it seems to, like, if you're doing it more regular, it seems that you adapt. But if you don't do it often enough, you tend to get sore.
And so the strain is definitely from that eccentric part, right? That is soliciting the muscle as it's lengthening, as it's stretching, and that just has a higher cost, let's say, to the body than the concentric phase.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Since we're on the topic of strength training, how has your approach to strength training for sprinting evolved over the years?
Well, I started to realize that everyone is different, and in the world of sprinting or running, and even in track and field, you get different types of sprinters, right? Just like you have in rugby or so on. I mean, you have the really natural big muscle, the bulldog types, and you have the greyhounds, the very fragile, light bones kind of guys. They can't do the same kind of training. And if you put a lot of body mass on that greyhound guy, it's going to slow him down for sure. But that guy that's already muscle framed, big muscle frame, is very strong, natural. They seem to benefit more. So I think one program doesn't fit everyone. You have to adjust it according to the type of runner you are, but also where you are in your career.
As in, maybe the younger athletes can tolerate more overall volume, and so they can allocate a bigger portion to strength training.
I think if you talk about team sports, and most contact team sports, you need a certain robustness, right? You don't need to develop a Usain Bolt maximum velocity to run 12.5 meters per second. But you need some muscles on your body so you can take a tackle, Yeah. So sometimes it's not you're not going to benefit so much in terms of maximum velocity, but you're going to be a better player. So and athletics is funny like that, because we're trying to maximize qualities. We're trying to maximize maximal speed, more or less, because that's so crucial. But in a team sport, I mean, you can do with kind of mediocre level on a lot of qualities, because that's what it takes.
Because you're not judged on one and only thing. It's not the stopwatch sport where you have one task and one and only thing to do. There's, like you said, many other things that come into play. So maybe you get a bit more wiggle room with each one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, of course, I mean, you have your strengths and weaknesses as well. And sometimes maybe don't put all eggs in the basket and just work on your weaknesses. I mean, sometimes it's good to really develop your strengths as far it can take you, because that's maybe your best knife in the toolbox, when it comes to your sport.
If we talk, I want to come back to this strength and weaknesses, but staying on the bulldog versus greyhound kind of profile, let's take two archetypes, one of each, and let's say they have similar training age, similar biological age as well. How much can the volume change in terms of the strength training? How much volume difference would you see from one profile to the other? What's the most extreme you've kind of seen on one side versus the other that someone can tolerate or benefit from?
Well, what is interesting too, that some people really respond easy to weightlifting, and it seems like the really fast twitch people, they just have to look at the bar to gain muscle mass. So you have to be really careful with those, And then you have the like the greyhound type of athletes that maybe have to work harder for muscle mass, but they also should maybe be careful with excess body mass, So But I think, most of the time, I think we rush development of maximum strength too much. I think we should think more in terms of quality. Let it take a year more. If you want to put on muscle mass, put on a half a kilo or 1 kilo a year. Don't pump up 7-8 kilos in a year. You're bound to run into trouble.
Yeah, literally run into trouble. How much can extra kilos impact running mechanics for a sprinter?
You see, 1 kilo of excess body mass, you're talking about maybe 0.05 of a second slower most of the time. Or other way, if you that's why most sprinters are on big diets when it comes to the competitive season, because they know they run faster if they can lose body fat. But and depends too what kind of muscles you're putting on there. If it's your trapezius, you don't run much with your trapezius, but if it's your glutes and if your hamstrings are getting developed, maybe you can benefit from it. But excess weight is not going to be a lot.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you talk before about the transfer the other way around from sprinting to lifting, where you see sprinters, accomplished sprinters that aren't maybe trained in the gym, but if you were to put them under a barbell, they can express that strength really, really well. It makes me think of an example that I'd heard from Coach Christopher Summer, who works in gymnastics in the US, and he was saying the same thing, where his gymnasts, even they'd never really done any strength training, he could put them under a bar and they could overhead press a significant amount of weight off the bat. Do you see the same relationship here between the sport and the strength?
Every sprinter in an Olympic final are strong, but not necessarily in the gym. But they can express a lot of force. But if you take them into a gym situation, maybe they are very uncomfortable with the bar. But if you put them down like in a leg press or something where there's no technical component, most of them are really, really strong. Yes, if you test them in an isometric setting, most of them are really, really strong, even though they have never done that kind of exercise before. And it's pretty interesting, because I think most camps, they reduce weight training maybe in May, even if they're going to peak in August or beginning of September. But it seems like it takes so little, to maintain. You don't have to lift a lot to maintain that strength. And I think it maybe has to do too because of the nature of the game, that sprinting is so neural, that the recruitment to those higher threshold motor units are there all the time. So you're training the system. You're not training the muscles in maybe in the same way, but you're training this nervous system a lot. When you sprint.
Mm-hmm. I remember reading from Charlie Francis' book that he would use the bench press to kind of solicit that systemic and nervous side of things without necessarily taxing the legs. Is that something you've ever used or ever considered using?
No, we haven't done. No, I can't say we have done that. No, we don't do much bench press at all.
Like you said, focus on the muscles that actually move you and get you faster down the track. You were talking about maintenance in terms of strength. So how little do you guys actually lift if they're in a competition or in a maintenance phase, just in order to keep what they already have?
Once a week, I say.
And if we were to talk,
yes, a few set, and that's really, really good about Olympic lifting, because you recruit a lot of muscles, So if you can just go in once a week and do a couple of cleans, maybe a jerk now and then, you can maintain a lot. But if you use other type of exercise, maybe take more exercise, more complex one.
And then as you have to do more reps and more sets, now you're taking away volume that you could allocate to sprinting or to other more useful things at that time.
Yeah, you need rest. During the season, you want to rest.
You need rest. How much rest do your sprinters get? Do they have a full day off? Do you have multiple half days off? Is there?
Well, it depends where in their career they are. Depends what kind of sprinter they are. I can't really say, but some of the guys that have been really, real workhorses, maybe in the general preparation, the training maybe 9 times a week, but during a competitive session, maybe season, maybe they train twice a week with high intensity, or maybe even once a week with high intensity. And we do a little bit of tempo and other stuff, to keep the mind occupied.
Keep the mind occupied. At some point, you have to fill the space with something. Otherwise, I'm sure they would go pretty crazy doing nothing.
Exactly.
When it comes to actual rest, if we talk sleep, is that something that you emphasize with your sprinters? Is that something that's already dialed into the culture and everybody has really good, sleep habits, sleep hygiene? What's your perspective on that?
It varies a lot too. If you have, I have a couple of young guys in my group. That's a good discussion, topic. When it comes to social media and being connected and I think sleep is. People tell me what kind of food supplement should I take, and I said, how much do you sleep? And I say 6 hours. But I forget about the food supplement. Start sleeping. That's the most potent way of improving performance there is. So that's really important, I find. But it depends too what kind of situation you are. Some guys are young fathers, and you are. You sure you get lack of sleep, but you have to try to sleep with the baby then, during the day and get a nap here and there, But sleep is definitely crucial.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like in today, like you said, in today's world of supplements, of special exercises, of magical systems, is the lifestyle component underappreciated at this point?
Well, as you know, the guys that has been succeeding most, that I had the pleasure of training, those are the guys that could really organize their life. They never compromised. Even on a training camp. I had a opportunity to train Johan Wissman. He's been in the Olympic and world championship final in the 400 meter. If you went to a training camp with him, you wouldn't even dream about going for sightseeing. He was there to train, and a lot of people say too that, I need to go to training camp, and especially this last year when it came to COVID, they couldn't go into training camps because they feel the benefit so much on a training camp. Well, then I say, then there's something wrong at home. If you need to go to a training camp to train properly, you need to go to a training camp to eat and sleep properly, then there's something wrong at home. That those training camps, 2 or 3 times a year can never compensate for your situation at home. Mm-hmm. You have to really sit down and look at your life. You only train maybe 2, 3, 4 hours a day, and the rest of the hours, you can really destroy those 4 hours if you do stupid things. It's,
mm-hmm. Going back to the strength training. I like to see what you do on Instagram and how you've blurred the line between the track and the gym. Thanks to your facility where it's kind of side by side. Is there an order that you prefer to operate in? Is it sprinting first, then lifting? Is there times where you use the lifting first?
No, I say regardless what period we sprint, try to sprint when we are rested. Mm-hmm. And strength is always priority number 2. I like to mix lifting with jumping. Mm-hmm. If you're the type of athlete that can jump, I need to excite them with some kind of jumping before lifting. I feel the lifting session becomes better. Mm-hmm. And also doing some jumping after to regain the elasticity sometimes you lose when you lift. So
almost like make a jumping sandwich around the lift.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I want to go back to the topic that we touched on before, which is training your strengths versus training your weaknesses. Is there a right balance in your mind? Should you tackle when should you spend real time on your weaknesses, if ever, or should you really just weigh heavy on your strengths most of the time because this is what's gonna maybe get you to where you want to go?
I think when you're young, when you're junior, you can afford to work more on your weaknesses. When you become a senior on a higher level, you need to to work more on your strengths. But then it also depends what kind of if speed is your weakness, what do you do? You have to work. If you're a sprinter, you have to work with your weakness if you want to be a sprinter.
So if your weakness is your sport, then you need to do more of your weakness.
Exactly.
But if your weakness is maybe lateral to what you're trying to achieve in competition, maybe you have a bit more leeway there as well, which kind of makes sense. You talked about just before, you talked about nutrition around competition. Is that something that has been common in sprinting for very long? The idea of maybe having some assistance from a nutritionist, or athletes being very well educated around nutrition and the impact of their body weight on their performance?
I think more or less everyone knows what a good diet is, and we try to teach them that as well, that a well balanced diet, how important it is, and don't forget your fatty oils and so on, don't just eat proteins, you need the carb for energy, and you need the oils for also, but we try to educate them, and some people are better than others, of course.
Do you have an idea of what an average sprinter might eat in terms of calories per day? Is there a very high calorie expenditure from the training that they're doing? Does that reflect in their dietary needs?
I mean, if you talk about a sprint session when maybe you run 300 meters totally, and the session takes 2 hours with a warm up. I mean, you burn maybe a sugar cube. You don't use a lot of energy, but you have a lot of stress on the system. So the micronutrients might be more important than the macronutrients when it comes to sprinting events. If you're a cross-country skier, you can eat 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 kilocalories a day, and you get everything. But if you ate like that as a sprinter, you would pork up and you wouldn't make any fine.
Yeah.
So I think the micronutrients are more important for in the sprint events.
I can almost see in my head the parallel between, like you said, the more long and endurance sports where it's more about the amount. There's a high energy turnover for long periods of time, where the sprinter needs to kind of empty the tank right then and there just once, and so everything has to work perfectly. It's like maybe the difference between, I don't know, I'm just making that up on the fly, so it's going to be terrible, but imagine a truck with a big tank that can go many, many hundreds of kilometers, or a drag racer where you have to fine tune all the little nuts and bolts because it's just that, that stretch to cover once, and then that's pretty much it.
Yeah. It's a huge stress load.
Do you see that nutrition has an impact on the readiness status of your athletes? If someone doesn't watch what they're eating, how can you see that translated directly in training, or is it more subtle usually than that?
It's a bit subtle, but you can sometimes you can tell instantly. People are coming to training and they're low on fuel. You can tell right away they're not ready to train. So if they work part-time, or if they go to school or whatever, and they're rushing to train, you have to make sure that they eat something before. I think it's very important, especially if some sessions tend to be long. So, you need to bring some stuff to work out to fill up.
Talking about, when somebody shows up to training, talk about the warm-up process. Does every athlete have a very individualized warm-up process? Is there a group aspect to it? And how much do you look at those different movements to determine how somebody's doing on that day?
When warm-up is training as well, and when I get a new athlete, I spend a lot of time with them, doing all sort of exercises and all sort of drills, just to see how they're moving, to teach them stuff, But eventually, I think most sprinters develop a warm-up routine that fits them well. Some people are ready in half an hour. Some people takes an hour and 15 minutes to get ready. So, when we're going to do a teamwork of sprinting, we usually say, okay, 1,500 hours is first start. Because you can't say we meet you at training at 2:00 because I'm going to mess up everything. They're not going to be ready at 3:00. Some people, some of them might be ready half an hour earlier. So it's very individual. So.
And what do you see a general frame that they all still adhere to in terms of what they do first, what they do second, and what they do last in their warm-up process? Or is it really highly individual, even in the different components and the sequencing of those components that they use?
Well, you have to raise your body temperature, have to excite the nervous system. And you have to work in rather great range of movements. So we do, we don't jog much during warm up, but most of them like to do gymnastics, things like that, do a bit of drills to get moving and striding. And it's a way. I don't think you shouldn't put emphasis into warm up, because it's training too. It could be a good tool. If you don't have a huge group, it's a great way of watching how they're moving. Maybe you have just the training today. It looks really sluggish. Maybe it's not time to, what have you done today? To get some kind of feedback, or people are feeling if they're really ready. So warm up is important.
Are there specific movements or exercises that you're going to maybe have a more precise eye on during the warm-up that are going to be the telltale sign, like you said, of whether somebody's maybe in a really good shape that day or maybe a little bit less?
I think you can see it in some of the drills. You can definitely see it when they start to do the stridings. When they start to build up the speed, you can tell. So usually at the end of the warm-up, when maybe it's time to change.
And how much will you change a session depending on what you see during the warm-up? Can it be a complete overhaul compared to what you had planned in the first place, or does it still stay pretty close to what you had planned for that day, depending on what you see?
But it's some athletes are very, they're very aware of what they're doing. I trained Peter Carlson. He was a national record holder for some years. He ran 10:18 and 9:98 wind 80. He was a really fast guy, and he was very aware of what he was doing. And we planned to sprint one day, and he came to track, and I could tell, but he could also sense that I'm not ready to sprint today. Either I go home or I do something low intensity. We try again tomorrow. Then you have the people that are bound to a training program. They know for a week before, today I'm going to sprint, So then they maybe are not good communicators. So those are the hardest one, that tries to do it without feeling great, So it depends what your plan are, Depends what kind of quality, what kind of intensity you want them to run at.
And so for you, in an ideal world, you wouldn't be afraid to heavily adjust the training on a given day, depending on what the athlete is maybe capable to that day?
I don't think I ever follow the program. It's no, it's always more or less always adjustments.
Yeah. What are maybe the biggest adjustments that you've made in the past that you're getting better and better at? Maybe I was going to say predict, but it's not the right word. What are some of the aspects of training that you maybe as a younger coach had to adjust more, and then ones that now you're able to maybe tailor a little bit better in your programming based on what's going to actually happen on the day?
I think as a young coach, you have all these plans, and you say you're going to run this and that, you're going to rest so long, and then you get anxious if they don't keep the pauses that you planned. I become much more relaxed when it comes to that. I let them run when they feel they're ready. It's a communication. If I okay, today we're going to do 4 times 80 meters, and the recovery is going to be 6. But if I see, after 5 minutes he's not ready, to run fast, I can easily double that. It doesn't matter. The rest, when it comes to speed, the rest is doesn't play a role. It's different if you're doing endurance. Maybe then you want to accumulate fatigue, and in that way stress the system. So then I tend to be a little bit more tough on the recovery. On the other hand, you don't want the mechanics to deteriorate too much. You want it to look pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Are there some methods that you maybe didn't want to use in the past or didn't like in the past, and that you've come around to using more and more in your coaching of sprinters, and that's from a very global perspective, whether it's on the sprinting or the lifting side?
I don't know. We experimented a lot with the assisted sprinting in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Was pretty new, and people did it. They usually pull too hard, or they run downhill and they got hurt. Mm-hmm. Today we have systems and machines that can do it very accurate. Mm-hmm. And like I said, today we train indoors, most of the year, and we can't benefit from tailwind. So I think assisted sprinting is probably the thing is going to make a big difference in the sprinting community, I think, especially for them that are training indoors.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about super maximum sprinting. I'm just talking about assistance. Just increase a couple of percent, increase the intensity in the same way as 2 or 3 meters per second will give you outside on the track. Mm-hmm. But like everything else, people, if they think something effective, they do too much, and they pull people too hard, and they have a bad experience, and they want to do it again.
Mm-hmm. What's usually too hard? What's the limit that you set for yourself working with assisted sprinting? Is there an upper limit that you kind of hold yourself to no matter what?
We did some cooperation with Antti Mero, researcher in Jyväskylä in Finland. He did, some studies in the 80s, and his conclusion was that the upper limit is about 103% of your maximum velocity. Mm-hmm. After that, you just start to fly further. Mm-hmm. You brake when you touch ground, so you fly higher and further, and that's not what you want. Mm-hmm. You want to, and but on the other hand, 100%, 103% of your competitive maximum velocity, that is a lot. Because as a sprint coach, you rarely see people coming closer than to 95% of the competition velocity in training. Very, very difficult. Maybe sometimes in a group setting, in a warm training camp, they can maybe go to 98, but never 100%. So if I was to put them up to 103 of the competitive max, that would be too much. So with assisted sprinting, we go up to 98 to 100% of what I expect is today's max, the training max, not the competition max. So. And we today we have equipment, and we can use EMU sensors, and we can attach it to the feet, so we can really control the contact out flying time. We can the flight distance, and you get so much interesting information that I wish we would have had that in the 90s when we started doing it, because at the time we had simple machines, and we rolled out big paper rolls, and we measured every stride, and it took a long time, and everything was to find out how much assistance force could I use on the sprinter. And I found also it was very individual. People could some people I could pull more because they could increase the stride frequency more. Some other people, they could not increase the stride frequency, but they just started to elongate the stride length. But the system today, is unbelievable.
Yeah, so let's talk about this a little bit. What has been the role of technology in your coaching process, and how has technology changed your coaching process over the years?
Well, I was a good friend of Italian physiologist and biomechanist Carmelo Bosco. Unfortunately, he died way too early now in the 2000s. But he's the guy that came up with the Bosco protocol, the counter movement jump and the squat jumps and the rebound jumps and so on. And he is the one that introduced sort of kind of testing for me with a simple switch mat in around 1990. Mm-hmm. And I found that very early that was a great way of monitoring the athletes in a very simple way, simple testing. And I could test them just before sprinting and see if they were recuperated or not. I could test them after and see how taxing the system was. So, and eventually, we started to attach encoders to barbells, so we could do velocity-based training. It wasn't called velocity-based training; we called it power training. This was in 1994. To see, how many repetitions you could do in a certain load, instead of just guessing. And guess what? It was very individual too. Some people could do maybe 4 repetitions, so 90% of the maximum power. Some other person could do maybe 10. So it's very individual as well. And he was all for measuring. And I today, of course, we do testing, but I don't do a lot of testing with my. Like the sprint or the track and field athletes I work with, but I like to monitor things. I like to measure as much as possible. So that is that to see that, of course, your eyes and you film and you're interested in kinetics, but you have to connect that to kinematics. If you can use both, I think it's a very, very powerful tool.
Is there some pieces of technology that you wish you would have had, maybe 20 years ago to monitor the training?
Definitely, the Dynasty system we use now for resistance and resistance sprinting, that's a definite game changer, I think. And the way you can attach other sensors at the same time, so you can do stride analysis while you're doing it, and you get the feedback before the athlete that come back to zero. We developed so many different machines, in the 90s, but the only really feedback we got was from the photo cells, the velocity. But that's about it. So that's something that has been a big change, at least for me.
Do you see any other big developments coming in the way of monitoring? Or you said you don't test your athletes much, but if we talk monitoring of training and feedback, is there things that are maybe a little bit young right now, but that you see potential in for the years to come?
Well, I think, like I said, we've been using the flywheels a lot, but, with the modern type of flywheel, you can get immediate feedback there too, because the benefit with a barbell that you get the feedback from, you see the mass at least. If you touch an encoder, you can measure velocity, but with a flywheel it's more difficult.
Yeah.
But now this technology you can get an instant feedback even there, So that is a big change. I think it's going to make that tool even more potent, I think.
From the parameters that you monitor on a daily basis with your sprinters, which ones have the most impact on your decision making as a coach?
Well, it's my eyes and my stopwatch, regardless of all the equipment in the world, And also, I must point that out, is the communication with the athletes, It's if you can't develop a good relationship with your athletes, if you can't have an honest, serious conversation and feedback of the field, it's not going to be good at all. It's going to be, I think, communication is maybe the thing I should have realized earlier when I was a coach. When I started when I was 28 years old, maybe it was more dramatic than I am now. Now I really, I think that's something we all should try to develop as much as we can, that capability.
So the most important technology in sprint training and sprint coaching is what's between our 2 ears and how we connect to the other humans around us.
I think so. Yeah, for sure.
Right. Okay, I think that's a fantastic way to end the conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today and sharing all that experience with us. For people who are maybe interested in learning more about what you do, where can we find more information?
Well, I do tweet now and then, Sprint Coach SWE, and you can find me on Sprint Coach on Instagram too. Sometimes I put on a video when we train, so you're free to contact me there if you want.
Fantastic. We'll put those links in the show notes. Håkan, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks a lot.